It all started with a letter slipped into my mailbox, cold, formal, and stamped with the HOA seal. They claimed my gate was a violation because it blocked what they called community access. But here's the thing, that gate wasn't just some decoration. It was my first line of security, the one thing that gave me peace of mind at night. I had built it on my property, with my own money, and now the HOA wanted me to tear it down as if I had no say in the matter. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. Maybe someone on the board didn't understand the property lines or the purpose of the gate. But the more I read the letter, the more I realized this wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. They wanted control, and this was their way of testing how far I would bend to their rules. Neighbors started whispering, some supporting me quietly, others warning me to just do what the HOA said before things got worse. But why should I back down when I knew I wasn't in the wrong? The pressure only grew. HOA members began showing up at my door, repeating their demands, quoting bylaws, and hinting at fines. Each visit was more aggressive than the last. I could feel the tension rising, not just in my yard but across the whole neighborhood. Some people wanted to see me fight, others were waiting for me to cave. Instead of removing the gate, I decided to do the opposite. I upgraded it. Stronger, smarter, and impossible to ignore. And that's when everything changed because the HOA never expected me to push back this way. What happened next would shake the entire community. The truth is, that gate wasn't just about keeping my property secure. It represented something bigger, my independence. When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought the HOA was supposed to make things better, to keep the place neat and organized. But over time, I started noticing how far their reach extended. They wanted a say in paint colors, holiday decorations, even how tall the grass could grow. It felt less like a community and more like a group of people policing every small choice. The gate became the line in the sand, the one thing I wasn't willing to compromise on. I had installed the original gate after a few unsettling incidents near my home. Strangers had cut across my yard late at night, and once, a package was stolen from my porch. That gate wasn't just metal and hinges, it was peace of mind. So when the HOA told me to remove it for so-called community access, I couldn't help but wonder. Access to what? And for who? My driveway? My backyard? None of it made sense, and the lack of clear answers only made me more suspicious. As I prepared to upgrade the gate, I dug deeper into the HOA's request. I started reading the bylaws line by line, looking for the rule they claimed I had broken. But no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find anything that gave them the authority to demand its removal. That discovery made me question their motives even more. Were they really trying to enforce rules, or were they testing how much control they could take? The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. But what I didn't know was that standing my ground was about to put me on a collision course with the entire board. The first real clash came during an HOA meeting. I sat in the back of the room, listening as they brought up my gate like it was some crime against the neighborhood. A few board members spoke in clipped, rehearsed tones, insisting that uniformity and community access were the reasons I needed to comply. But when I asked them to show me the exact rule I had broken, the room went quiet. Instead of giving me answers, they shifted the conversation to fines and penalties. It was clear they weren't used to being challenged. Outside of the meetings, the tension spread into everyday life. Some neighbors stopped making eye contact, afraid to take sides. Others would quietly pull me aside and admit they admired my courage, though they'd never say it out loud at a meeting. A retired veteran down the street even told me he'd faced something similar when the HOA tried to force him to repaint his house for being too bold. It seemed I wasn't the first to be targeted, just the first who refused to back down. At the same time, I couldn't ignore how personal the conflict was becoming. The board president in particular seemed determined to make an example out of me. She would drive slowly past my house, taking photos of the gate as if gathering evidence. Notes began showing up on my door, warning me about escalating fines. The gate had gone from a simple boundary to the center of a growing power struggle. I strengthened it with new locks, a camera system, and a design that made it clear I wasn't going to be intimidated. But each upgrade seemed to fuel the board's determination. What started as a single dispute was quickly turning into a battle for control of the neighborhood itself. The pressure reached a boiling point when I received a certified letter from the HOA. This wasn't just another warning slipped into my mailbox, it was an official notice of violation with fines that grew by the day. They gave me a deadline to remove the gate, threatening legal action if I refused. Holding that letter in my hands, I realized this was no longer about a simple structure on my property. It had turned into a showdown between my right to protect my home and their hunger for control. Word spread fast, and the whole neighborhood seemed to be buzzing. Some people whispered that the HOA was going too far, while others claimed I was stirring up unnecessary trouble. Even kids riding their bikes slowed down in front of my house, staring at the gate that had somehow become the center of everyone's attention. It felt like every set of eyes was on me, waiting to see who would break first. The tension only escalated when I showed up at the next board meeting with evidence. I brought copies of the bylaws, highlighted sections proving there was no rule against my gate, and photographs showing my property lines. I laid it all out on the table, forcing them to confront facts they had avoided for weeks. For a moment, the room went silent. Then, instead of backing down, the board president doubled down, insisting that community standards gave them authority even when the rules didn't spell it out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me wonder if I'd gone too far. But I knew one thing. I couldn't turn back now. The next move would decide everything, and the HOA was preparing to strike harder than ever before. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get more intense, a new twist hit me out of nowhere. A neighbor I barely spoke to knocked on my door late one evening, nervously glancing over his shoulder before handing me a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of an internal HOA email chain he had gotten hold of. As I read through it, my stomach tightened. The board wasn't just targeting my gate. They were openly discussing a plan to expand community access by pushing for an easement through my property. In their words, my land was the perfect entry point for a pathway they had been planning for months. Suddenly, their obsession with my gate made sense. This was never about uniformity or rules. It was about control of land that didn't belong to them. The revelation changed everything. What I thought was a personal battle about one gate was now part of a larger scheme. If they succeeded, not only would I lose my privacy, but I'd also be forced to watch strangers use a strip of my yard as a public walkway. The thought of that violation shook me to my core. When I confronted the board with the leaked emails at the next meeting, the room erupted. Some neighbors were furious at the betrayal, while others sat stunned, unsure who to believe. The board president's face turned pale, then hard as stone, as she accused me of fabricating the documents. But the damage was done. Their secret was out. The stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just about the gate anymore. The HOA wanted a piece of my land, and I was the last obstacle in their way. The battle lines were drawn, and everyone knew the next move would change everything. The showdown came faster than I expected. The HOA called an emergency meeting to decide once and for all what to do about my gate. The room was packed, every chair filled, with neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls. Tension buzzed in the air, and when my name was called, all eyes turned to me. I walked to the front carrying a folder of documents I had spent nights gathering, property surveys, legal opinions, and proof of ownership. My hands shook, but my voice was steady as I laid out the truth. I explained that the HOA had no legal authority to demand access through my property. The surveys clearly showed the land in question was mine, and the attorney's letter I held confirmed it. When I read aloud parts of their own bylaws, the silence in the room was deafening. For the first time, the board president looked cornered, her usual confidence cracking. But just as it seemed the board had no choice but to back down, the unexpected twist came. A neighbor I had trusted, someone who had quietly supported me all along, stood up and revealed he had actually been working with the board behind the scenes. He admitted he stood to gain financially if the easement went through, since the pathway would increase the value of his adjacent property. His betrayal sent shockwaves through the room. Gasps and angry whispers broke out, neighbors now realizing the conflict wasn't just about rules, but about personal profit. In that moment, the tide turned completely. The board's credibility collapsed, and a vote was taken on the spot. Not only was the demand to remove my gate struck down, but new limits were placed on the board's power. My gate stood stronger than ever. But so did the lesson about trust. When the meeting finally ended, the atmosphere felt completely different. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now walked up to shake my hand, thanking me for standing firm when they hadn't found the courage to do the same. The board members shuffled out quietly, their authority weakened, and their secrets exposed. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like the community was on my side instead of against me. The gate still stood tall at the end of my driveway, but now it meant more than just security. It had become a symbol of standing up for what's right. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the neighborhood slowly eased. People began speaking more openly about their frustrations with the HOA, and for the first time, change seemed possible. A few of the board members resigned, and others started talking about revising the rules to make them fairer and more transparent. The neighbor who had betrayed me sold his property not long after, unable to face the backlash from everyone who now knew the truth. Looking back, I realized this fight had been about more than property lines or one gate. It was about independence, respect, and not letting authority push people around without reason. The experience taught me that standing your ground isn't easy, but sometimes it inspires others to do the same. My gate still clicks shut every evening, stronger and smarter than before, but it no longer feels like a dividing line. It feels like a reminder, to me and to everyone who watched this unfold, that communities work best when people value fairness over control. In the end, the HOA learned their limits, and I learned the power of refusing to be intimidated.